Hello. This video will be a tier list for all black openings for players at the beginner level. Like I did for my white openings tier list, I'm going to use these grading criteria. I'm assuming that a beginner level is at or below about 1,000 rating on chess.com. And then the grading criteria I'm using is 1, how easy is it to learn the opening for a beginner? This can involve things like how straightforward are the ideas and how much memorization would be required to play the opening. Chances to get the starting position, that's pretty straightforward. How likely is it that you're actually going to be able to play your opening? 3 would be chances of playing into the opponent's prep. In other words, how likely is it that our opponent is going to be at or more studied than you are in this opening? And then 4 would be what are the chances that we can get a favorable position with the black pieces out of the opening? And then the last point is that I'm assuming that for this tier list, this is to pick main openings to climb over a long period of time, over hundreds of games, and not just to trick 1 or 2 opponents in a blitz game here or there. The first opening we're going to look at is the From's Gambit, or the From's Gambit. This happens after 1 f4, and then black playing the move e5. I don't think I need to say too much about this. The bird's opening is seen incredibly rarely, so this is just not practical. Like, the chances you get this opening are probably less than 1 in 100. So this is just the definition of a not practical opening. The second opening we're going to look at is the Hippo. This is a system-based opening, so it doesn't really matter what white plays. The Hippo is defined by playing like this double fianchetto setup with the black pieces, pretty much regardless against what the white side does. So this is... It's bad, but playable. I even think there's better system-based openings than the Hippo, if that's the reason you're playing the Hippo. But at the same time, you're not just outright losing in any way. Like, you're going to get a playable position. It's just there's a lot better options than playing the Hippo. That we'll get into later on in the video, but yeah, essentially the Hippo is not the best opening, but it is perfectly playable. Next up is the Queen's Gambit accepted. This starts after the Queen's Gambit line with d4, d5, c4, and then accepting the Gambit with d takes c4. In terms of responses against the Queen's Gambit, this is, I would say, the middle of the 3. I will put this in good. It's a little bit more theory heavy than one of the other lines, which I think is better, that we'll get into. But the Queen's Gambit accepted opening itself is a perfectly good opening. And if you're willing to learn it, then it's a perfectly good weapon. You're not going to get it all the time. I think the Queen's Gambit is probably less common at the beginner level than openings like the London. But if you are seeing the Queen's Gambit, then the accepted is one of the acceptable options you can play. Next up is the Queen's Gambit declined. This again happens in the Queen's Gambit with d4, d5, c4, and then black playing the move e6 in order to decline the Gambit. I think the QGD is the best option against the Queen's Gambit. I would put it in S tier. The only issue is I think that bishop f4 is going to be more common than c4 at a beginner level. Which, if you're seeing bishop f4, then we can't play the Queen's Gambit declined anymore. But against the Queen's Gambit declined, I think this is the best option. I'll put it at the top of the good tier. It's not going to be super common that you get this opening, but it's a very, very solid, straightforward option. If you get this opening offered to you, basically, I think it's a 10 out of 10 in every category, besides the chances to get the starting position. Next is the Slav Defense in the Queen's Gambit. This, again, out of the Queen's Gambit, d4, d5, c4, and then the Slav starts with the move c6 in order to decline. The Slav at a beginner level, I would say, is kind of bad but playable. The issue with the Slav is that it just ends up being very drawish. In many of the lines, white will eventually take the pawn. And then when you look at these pawns and how like completely symmetrical they are, the position just ends up being super dead and equal a lot of the time. And as I mentioned in my white openings tier list video, I think at the beginner level, it's way more important to play for wins than playing for draws. That being said, like a dead even position is still perfectly playable at a beginner level. I just think it's a better habit to play openings that really try to play for wins rather than play for draws. Next up is the Albin Countergambit. This is another line in the Queen's Gambit with d4, d5, c4, and then black counter-gambiting with the move e5. This is a very, very dangerous line for the white pieces, especially if they haven't seen this before or if they haven't studied it carefully. Practically speaking, this line will get a lot of winning positions for the black pieces at a beginner level. This line particularly is one of the reasons I don't recommend beginners play the Queen's Gambit with the white pieces. Just because a lot of beginners aren't ready to study like 5 different sidelines that they have to be prepared for. And the Albin Countergambit is one of the most dangerous weapons against the Queen's Gambit. This one I have to put very closely with the Queen's Gambit declined. I think for the normal player, the Queen's Gambit declined will be better. Just because it's fundamentally sound. The Albin Countergambit, if white does know all the theory, white will just end up a pawn without compensation. But that being said, practically speaking, the Albin Countergambit is very, very strong at this level. And I think if you're an aggressive player who likes attacking, the Albin Countergambit could be a better option than the QGD. But I think the Albin and the QGD are 1 and 2, and they're very close. Next up, we have the Nimzo Indian Defense, which follows after d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, and then bishop to b4, pinning the knight to the king. I think the problem with this is that it's just not very practical. The chances you're going to get all of this are kind of rare. For example, if we play d4, knight f6, if they don't play if they play something like bishop f4, or if they play knight c3, already we can no longer play the Nimzo Indian. Like literally all 3 of those exact moves have to happen in order for us to get the Nimzo Indian opening. So I think regardless of how good or not bad the opening is, I just don't think the chances you get it are high enough to study this at this level. Next up is the Grunfeld Defense, which occurs after d4, knight f6, c4, g6, knight c3, bishop g7, knight f3, and then the move d5. There's a few different move orders that could happen, but it's characterized by this fianchettoed bishop and the move d5. Um, I'm not going to dive too much into it. I never recommend the Grunfeld to anyone below like 2100 elo. It's just way too much theory. I don't play the Grunfeld either myself because I'm just kind of intimidated by how much theory it involves. So I would not recommend it to any player below 1000, pretty simply. Next up, we have the King's Indian Defense, which is a system-based opening. It can be played after any single d4 opening. After d4, we play knight f6. From here, the specific moves from white don't really matter too much, but it's going to be a system-based opening where the main characteristics are the pawn on d6, the knight on f6, bishop on g7, and castle and kingside. I have a video on the King's Indian Defense for the black pieces. I think it's one of the easiest openings to learn. It's also an opening that scales really well long term. It can be played all the way up until the Grandmaster level. I think this is the first opening that's going to go right into the S tier. Like I said, it's system-based, so it's one of the easiest openings to learn initially. And for chances to get the starting position, again, you can get it into any single d4 opening, so it's 100%. The King's Indian, while popular, it's not the most popular moves against 1d4. So I think for chances of playing into opponent's prep, it's maybe 6 or 7 out of 10. Still very, very good. And for 4 chances of favorable position, it's like 7 or 8 out of 10 again. You're going to get a very unbalanced position where both sides are fighting for an advantage, and it's going to be a win or lose game for both sides. It's going to be very rarely a draw when you play the King's Indian Defense. I think for all those reasons, the King's Indian Defense is going to be our first S tier opening for the black pieces against 1d4. Next up, we have the Queen's Indian Defense, which is kind of similar to the King's Indian Defense, except it's all going to kind of be on the opposite side of the board. With something like this, for example. This is roughly what the Queen's Indian Defense looks like. I think the Queen's Indian is considerably worse than the King's Indian at this level. It's a lot harder to learn than the King's Indian. It doesn't really present any more winning chances. It's a little bit more rare from the white piece's perspective, but not enough to the point that it makes it worth it. I think the Queen's Indian I'm going to put in bad but playable. Yeah. I think it's bad but playable. Like you can certainly play it. I think it's just too hard to learn for not enough payout when you compare it to something like the King's Indian or the Queen's Gambit Declined even. I think those two openings are much, much easier to learn and give equal, if not better, winning chances than the Queen's Indian. So there's not really much reason to play the Queen's Indian for that. Next up, we have the Dutch Defense, which follows after d4 and then f5 by the black pieces. The Dutch Defense is very, very good. It's a very aggressive opening against 1d4. I'm considering throwing it in S tier. I think the only thing that's stopping me from throwing it right in S tier is that it's just a little harder to learn than an opening like the King's Indian. The The Dutch defense and the King's Indian are very, very similar in a lot of ways in terms of how they play. I just think the King's Indian is quite a lot easier to learn than the Dutch. But if you're a super attacking player, the Dutch defense could be a more appealing option. I'm going to throw the Dutch defense at the top of the good tier. I think the difficulty of learning it's pretty high. I would say it's like maybe like a 4 or 5 out of 10 in terms of like, it's going to take quite a bit of time before you learn it and get it down. But if you're willing to learn it, it's an excellent weapon, even long term, against d4. Next, we have the Budapest Gambit, which follows after d4, knight f6, c4, and then black playing the move e5 to gambit the pawn. There's a lot of problems with the Budapest. First of all, it's completely unsound. So if white knows the theory, then you're just going to lose a pawn for no compensation. There's also not really that many tricks in it. There's only so many. There's only a few. It's not as tricky as a lot of other gambit lines. Even at the beginner level, it still doesn't even have a very good win rate. It's kind of surprising that it doesn't perform very well even at a low level. I'm considering throwing it in trash, but kind of looking ahead and seeing some of the other openings on this list, I don't think it's as bad as some of the other stuff we're going to see. I'm going to throw it in the bottom of bad but playable. Yeah. You would expect that these trappy gambits at a lower level or beginner level would have like a much higher win rate, but it still doesn't even have a positive win rate below 1,000. So statistically, the Budapest Gambit is just not worth playing whatsoever. Actually, the more I think about it, I think I'm going to throw this in trash. The chances you're going to get the opening are low. Even when you get the opening, it doesn't perform very well. I think this is going to be the first trash opening. Next, we have the Englund Gambit. The Englund Gambit follows after d4 and then black gambiting a pawn with d5. Okay, unlike the Budapest Gambit, the Englund Gambit actually has a lot of dangerous traps in it. And not only that, when I looked at the Lichess database, when you follow the most popular moves played by white, they always stumble into a trap. So unlike the Budapest Gambit, like statistically, the Englund Gambit performs much, much, much better. And not only that, you're going to get this 100% of the time against 1d4. You don't have to rely on your opponent playing a very specific set of 3 moves. The Englund Gambit is a very, very serious option to consider. I think it's going to go at the bottom of good. Again, it's a gambit which is dubious, meaning if white knows all of their theory, you're going to end up down a pawn for nothing. But at a level below 1,000, that's not the end of the game. And you can still play on from there, even if they do know all of their theory. So I think the Englund Gambit, if you're looking for a very trappy line, aggressive line against 1d4, the Englund Gambit is something you can seriously consider looking at and playing from time to time. Next up, we have the Knight's Tango, which follows after d4, knight f6, c4, knight c6. This is a extremely dubious opening. I don't think it's going to be punished necessarily all that much at a beginner level. But at the same time, if you're going to devote some time into studying an opening against d4, why would you spend your time studying this? I'm thinking of putting it in trash. The only thing that makes me consider putting it in bad but playable is that it doesn't really get punished all that often at a beginner level. But at the same time, like, there's no upside to playing it. If you play this opening, you're basically begging that your opponent doesn't punish you. And if they don't punish you, you just get a normal position. So, like, what's the upside? You're hoping they don't punish you, and if they don't punish you, you just get a normal game. Like, there's no chance to win with it. So I think it's trash. Next up, we have the Polish Defense, which happens after 1d4 by white, and then black playing b5. I'll be honest, I have not studied this opening very much because I know it's dubious and nobody plays it. So I genuinely don't know if there is any actual upside to it. But based on what I know, and when looking at the Lichess statistics, white is just consistently crushing whenever black tries this at the beginner level. So just based on what I know and what the stats show me, I think the Polish defense has to just go in trash. Next up, we have the Rat Defense, which follows after d4, d6, c4, and then e5. The Rat, it's fine as an opening itself. Not too good, not too bad. The other issue with it is just not... You have to have d4 and c4 played. Like, if they play bishop... if they do a bishop move, for example, or like if they play bishop here, we can no longer play the rat. If they play knight, we can't play the rat. There's just a lot of sidelines which make the rat not playable. I think I'm going to put it in the bad but playable tier. If you get the starting position, it's totally okay. There's a lot of better options, but again, the problem is just you're not going to get the starting position super often. Next up, we have the Benoni Defense. There's a few different move orders this can arise out of, but most typically it happens after d4, knight f6, c4, c5, and then d5 by white. I think like a lot of other openings that we've seen, the chances you get the starting position are a big issue. I think actually I think it's such an issue that this opening should just go ahead and not practical. Because this relies on seeing both c4 and d4. And again, I think just at a beginner level, the London is a lot more common. And we cannot play the old Benoni against the London. So I think the Benoni defense just belongs in the not practical tier. Next is the Benko Gambit, which follows out of the Benoni defense with d4, knight f6, c4, c5, d5, and then the move b5 is the start of the Benko Gambit. Just like the Benoni defense, this has to go in not practical, considering it is the Benoni defense plus an additional move. I just don't expect enough players below 1,000 are going to play the 3 moves of theory necessary for you to get the starting position. Okay, next up is going to be the block of all of these Sicilian openings. I'm going to spoil it now. All of the Sicilian openings I'm going to be throwing in either too much theory or not practical. and I'm going to delve into the reasons why. If you don't want to hear my mini rant about why I don't recommend the Sicilian below 1600, then you can skip to the next chapter using the timestamps below. But now I'm going to quickly explain why I would never recommend the Sicilian to anyone below 1000 elo. Okay, I am a player who decided that they want to start playing the Sicilian defense against 1e4. The first thing that we have to learn when we play the Sicilian is what do we do against the open Sicilian when white plays knight f3 and d4. Cool. So let's pretend that I've decided I'm going to play the Najdorf Sicilian if I see the open Sicilian. Great. So I delve into a game, I see e4, I play c5, ready to play the open Sicilian, and then immediately white just plays knight c3, and I no longer know what I'm doing. Well, this is now called the closed Sicilian. I lose this game. Afterwards, I go decide I'm going to look at this closed Sicilian defense and learn how I'm going to play against the closed Sicilian. Great, so now I'm ready for the next game. I get into the next game. They play e4. I play c5, ready for either the open or the closed Sicilian, and I'm feeling good about myself. And then suddenly, they play bishop to c4, and I don't know what I'm doing. I think you get the point I'm trying to make. The problem with playing the Sicilian is that there's like literally 100 moves of sidelines that you have to learn before you even get into a main line. Not only that, let's say we get to our main line. I said I wanted to play the Najdorf, so let's see what happens when I get to the Najdorf position. Okay, we're in the starting position of the Najdorf, and it's white to play. In this position, and I'm not even exaggerating, this is a move, 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 this is a move. Even queen d2 is a move. All of these arrows I've drawn are all legitimately viable main lines that white can play against us. So great. We spent 50 games losing against all of these sidelines. We finally get our starting position. And now look, there's like 15 different lines we have to be prepared against. I don't know anyone below 1000 rating who's going to be willing to go through all of this. Just to go through my own personal story, I started playing the Sicilian around when I got to like 1600 elo. And when I made the switch to playing the Sicilian, I went on a losing streak and I dropped like 100 rating points before I started actually winning games. So that's a long-winded rant I went through to just explain why you should never be playing the Sicilian below 1500 elo. There's just a million sidelines that you have to be prepared for before you can even get to a mainline Sicilian. And even when you get to a mainline Sicilian, guess what? There's another 100 moves of theory you have to be prepared for. This is just a very ridiculous amount of studying for any player below 1000, and it's completely unnecessary to being able to win games at that level. Play e5, play d5 against e4 and d4. Don't waste hours of your life memorizing this stuff if you're just trying to climb to 1000. I'm going to skip ahead in the recording and just put all of these between not practical and too much theory, and I'm not going to explain them individually, because I think my little mini rant is enough to explain why the Sicilian is just a terrible choice for any player below 1000 rating. Here are all of my final ratings for all of the Sicilian openings. Next up, we have the modern defense. The modern defense is a system-based opening usually. If we see e4, we play the move g6, where we're going to fianchetto and play what looks kind of like a King's Indian setup against 1e4. The modern defense is an opening which is decent. I think there's just a lot of better choices against 1e4 that we can be playing. I'm going to throw it in the bad but playable. It's easy to learn initially, but it doesn't really give a lot of winning chances like a lot of other openings we'll see against 1e4. But if you really want to play it, it's totally acceptable. It's totally playable. People play this even at like 2,000 plus rating. It's just that it's not the most ambitious opening for black. Next up, we have the Owen's Defense, which after 1e4 is the move b6 and fianchettoing our light square bishop. Owen's Defense, I put it pretty similarly to the modern. Bad but playable. I think there's just better options. It's also like harder to learn than some of the options that we'll see that I think are better. Yeah, I think this is a fair rating for it. Next up, we have the Alekhine's Defense, which follows after e4 and playing the move knight to f6. The Alekhine's Defense is an opening I do not hold in very high regard at this level. It takes a lot of theory to know it, and even with all of that theory, it's already a dubious opening, just at its core. So just given that, I'm thinking of throwing it in trash. But I think that's a little too harsh on it. I think it's like, if you know all of the theory and you've learned all of it, it's a perfectly playable opening. But if you haven't already learned it, then I can tell you it's not worth investing your time into this opening versus other S tier and good openings that we're going to see. Next up, we have the Scandinavian Defense, which follows after e4 and then the move d5. I hold the Scandinavian Defense in very high regard at the beginner level. It's extremely beginner friendly, very, very easy to learn, not a lot of theory or like sidelines you have to be worried about. It's probably one of the easiest openings to learn against 1e4. The only issue with the Scandinavian is that long-term beyond 1,000 elo, it becomes slightly worse and worse the higher elos you get. But at a beginner level, this is a very, very solid choice. I think I'll put it in S tier just for how easy to learn and beginner friendly it is, which is almost, I think, more valuable than it being like fundamentally super, super strong. I think it's more important that it's just super easy to learn and super easy to play. Next up, we have the modern Scandinavian. Close to the Scandinavian Defense, usually we recapture the pawn with our queen. This would be the main line. The modern variation is defined by trying to recapture the pawn with the knight instead, with knight to f6. I think the modern Scandinavian, it's also good. It's slightly harder to learn than the normal Scandinavian. That's the only issue I have with it. So I think just because of that, I'll put it at the top of good. It is a very good choice. I think the normal Scandi is just better. Although, at higher ratings, the modern might be better. But I think at this elo, the normal Scandinavian is perfectly good. Next up, we have the Pirc Defense, which follows after e4, d6, and then usually we're going to go fianchetto our bishop, and there's a few ways that the Pirc can be played, actually. It could also be done with e5 and moving the bishop this way, but there's just a couple options for playing a Pirc Defense. I think the Pirc is bad but playable. It's kind of hard to learn, and that's the main issue with it. It's just a lot harder to learn than like the Scandinavian. And even if you learned both the Scandinavian and the Pirc Defense equally, it's not really, you can't really argue that one is better than the other. So just given that, like, you should just learn the Scandinavian if you're going to pick one. But the Pirc Defense, like, if you already know it, it's an okay opening. So I think bad but playable is the right spot for it. Next up, we have the French Defense, which follows after e4, e6, and then usually d4, d5. I have a video on the French Defense. It's an extremely solid opening. Gives a lot of good winning chances. Not the easiest to learn because you have to be aware of a couple, like 3 main variations. So it's not as easy to learn as the Scandinavian, which is basically just one variation always. But if you are willing to learn it, the French Defense is objectively better than the Scandinavian. I'm just putting it at good because of the difficulty of learning it well versus the Scandi. I'm weighting ease of learning a little bit higher than I am like objective strength of the opening. Next up, we have the Caro Kann Defense, which follows after e4, c6, d4, d5. I put it very similarly to the French. I think it's a little bit better than the French Defense. Again, only reason it's a little lower than the Scandi against e4, it's just a little bit harder to learn the Caro Kann because there's 3 main variations you have to be aware of versus 1 main variation in the Scandi. If you are willing to learn it, again, the Caro Kann is objectively better than the Scandi. I'm just putting it in top of good due to the ease of learning differences. Next up, we have e5, which of course happens after e4 and e5. I mean, e5, I have to just throw at the top of S tier. Like, this really should be the first opening you learn with black. It's the most fundamental, the most straightforward, sticks to all the basics. Yeah, nothing else I can really say on it. I have a video guide on it if you'd like to check it out. I think e5 is the best beginner opening for black, objectively. The other options, like the Caro Kann, the French, they just present different styles of positions. But e5, in terms of objectivity, is similar, and it's also a lot easier to learn. So I think overall e5 has to be the best beginner opening for black. Next up, we have the Petrov Defense, which follows after e4, e5, knight f3, and then knight f6. The Petrov on its own, it's an okay opening. My issue with it, like with some other openings, it's very drawish and equal. It is basically just playing for a draw, fundamentally, as an opening. I believe we should be playing openings that play for wins at a beginner level to build good habits. But like, objectively, the Petrov is a solid opening. It's just not playing for a win, which is my issue with it. Next up, we have the Philidor Defense, which happens after e4, e5, knight f3, and then the move d6 to protect the pawn. The Philidor is very common at the beginner level. At top level play, the Philidor is actually just seen as complete and utter trash. The problem with the Philidor Defense is that it just gives all the initiative to white and presents no counterplay for black. if white knows what they're doing. Like, the Philidor was originally meant to be a super solid opening, but with modern analysis, we know it's a very just passive and weak opening that gives all of the fun to white. Like, objectively, it's not outright losing, especially at the beginner level. But if you're going to learn an opening, don't waste your time learning the Philidor, because you're going to waste your time learning an opening that's just going to make you lose. So if you learn anything from this, just know the Philidor Defense is a bad opening. Next up, we have the Damiano Defense, which happens after e4, e5, knight f3, and then the move f6. Okay, the Damiano Defense is the same as the Philidor Defense, but it's actually objectively losing. Like, it's even worse than the Philidor. I think that's all I really need to say about it. Next up, we have the Stafford Gambit, which happens after e4, e5, knight f3, knight f6, which is the Petrov defense, knight takes e5, and then knight to c6, knight takes knight, d takes c6. This is the starting position of the Stafford Gambit. I think the Stafford Gambit is an amazing opening if you can actually get the starting position. And that's the big problem I have with it. The big problem I have with the Stafford Gambit is it requires that they have to take this pawn. If they play just something like this, or if they just move their knight out, we can't really play the Stafford Gambit anymore. If they play a move like this, we can't play the Stafford Gambit anymore. Again, like I said, if you get the starting position of the Stafford Gambit, it's an S tier for me. It's just the major problem with it is getting that starting position. It is also objectively unsound. If white knows all of their theory, then black is down a pawn for no compensation. But at the beginner level, no one really does know all the theory. I'll put it towards the bottom of good. Again, that's heavily weighed down just by the fact that I don't think you're going to get this starting position often. But if you do get the starting position, it's an S tier opening. It's just getting there is too difficult, in my opinion. Okay, next up we have the Latvian Gambit. The Latvian Gambit happens after e4, e5, knight f3, and then the move f5 in order to gambit the f-pawn. I had to confer with the Lichess database stats on this. The Latvian Gambit performs extremely well at a beginner level. Like on move 3, I think the top move was only played like 10% of the time. And black has a surprisingly high win rate in this opening when they play it. So even though it's objectively dubious, I think just given how practically well it performs, it's going pretty high up in the good tier, in my opinion. I'll put it right there, just because all of the openings that are above are objectively sound. But the Latvian Gambit is, I mean, I was surprised, but it's a very, very strong opening in terms of how well it performs. Okay, next up we have the Elephant Gambit, which happens after e4, e5, knight f3, and then the move d5 in order to try to gambit this pawn, or gambit this pawn rather. I had to double check with the Lichess database on this. The Elephant Gambit, even at the beginner level, performs really badly. This is an objectively unsound opening, which also has a very lopsided win rate in favor of white, even at the beginner level. And I think that's all we need to say about it. It's just not a good opening. Okay, next up we have the Black Lion Defense, which I'll be honest, I had never heard of before. I had to look it up, and they're saying it happens after the moves e4, d6, d4, knight f6, knight c3, and knight b d7. Yeah, Lion Defense. I honestly had never really heard of this before. I mean, just looking at the position, it's not terrible, but it's not very good. Like, I just don't really see much of the upside to it. I think it's a bad but playable opening. But to be fair, I'm not super experienced with it, so I don't know if there's any like crazy traps in it that I'm not aware of, but I think bad but playable is a fair spot. Okay, next we have the Rosseau Gambit, which happens out of the Italian with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, and then the move f5. So I double-checked the Lichess stats on this. A majority of the people do fall for the trap. The problem with this opening is it's essentially just one trap, and if they don't fall for it, you're losing. But people do fall for the trap, so this is a hard one for me to rate. I'll put it at the top of bad but playable. Yeah, I think that's fair. It's super unsound, it's super cheesy. It works way more often than it should. So I don't think it's worth using to climb long term, but you can use it here and there and it'll probably work. Next up we have the Schliemann Defense, which occurs out of the Ruy-Lopez with e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, and then the move f5 in this position. I think this opening is actually very good. The only problem is the Ruy-Lopez is not very common. I think I can pretty easily just throw this in not practical, because we're not going to see the Ruy-Lopez enough for this to be worth it. And finally, we have the Berlin Defense, which also occurs out of the Ruy-Lopez, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, and then the move knight to f6 is the starting position of the Berlin Defense. This one's easy for me to rate. It's too much theory. Nobody below 2,000 should be playing this against the Ruy. It's just way too difficult to play, especially at this level. And that's it for my tier list. If you disagreed with any of my opinions, please let me know in the comments below. Given that this list is so opinion-based, I'm sure some people will have different opinions on some of these openings. If you have any suggestions for other videos, you can also let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It helps out a small channel like mine greatly. Other than that, good luck in your future chess games, have a good rest of your day, and goodbye.